Good afternoon and welcome to the Washington Report with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington. Let's get to it. The Senate worked through the weekend and will stay in session through Friday. The House will come back Tuesday and stay in session through Friday. This week in the House, they'll come back Tuesday with the first vote set for 6:30 p.m. At that time, the House is scheduled to consider 15 bills under suspension of the rules. On Wednesday and for the balance of the week, the House is scheduled to consider 4 bills pursuant to a rule. They are H.R. 8029, the Pay Our Homeland Defenders Act, H.Res. 1128, expressing the support of the House of Representatives for the Department of Homeland Security, H.R. 7084, the Defending American Property Abroad Act of 2026, and H.R. 5103, the Make the District of Columbia Safe and Beautiful Act of 2026. Last week in the Senate came back on Tuesday and voted to end debate on and then to confirm the nomination of Anna St. John to serve as a U.S. District Judge for the Eastern District of Louisiana. Then the Senate agreed to a motion to proceed to consideration of a message from the House, the amended version of S. 1383, which is now the Save America Act. The vote on the motion to proceed was 51 to 48. On Wednesday, the Senate rejected, by a vote of 47 to 53, a motion to discharge S.J. Res. 118, a joint resolution to direct the removal of United States armed forces from hostilities within or against the Islamic Republic of Iran that have not been authorized by Congress, a war powers resolution. On Friday, the Senate rejected, by a vote of 47 to 37, under reconsideration, a motion to end debate on the motion to proceed to H.R. 7147, the full-year funding bill for the Department of Homeland Security. On Saturday, the Senate failed to end debate on an amendment to protect women's and girls' sports offered by Alabama Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville. Then the Senate failed to end debate on a motion to suspend the rules on a resolution regarding TSA funding offered by New York Democrat Senator Chuck Schumer, the minority leader. On Sunday, the Senate agreed to a motion to end debate on the nomination of Oklahoma Republican Senator Markwayne Mullin to serve as Secretary of Homeland Security. And then they were done. This week in the Senate comes back into session this afternoon. Upon the use or yielding back of time currently scheduled for 7:45 p.m., the Senate will proceed to a roll call vote on the nomination of Oklahoma Republican Senator Markwayne Mullin to serve as Secretary of Homeland Security. Then the Senate will proceed to a roll call vote on a motion to end debate on the nomination of Colin McDonald to serve as an Assistant Attorney General. And then we anticipate the Senate will return to consideration of the House amendment to S. 1383, the Save America Act. Now let's talk about the FISA extension. Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, also known as FISA, is up for renewal by the end of April. This provision of the law allows the U.S. government to surveil foreign nationals overseas. The provision expires April 20th. According to news reports, the White House has been pushing for an 18-month extension with no changes to the law. Nevertheless, Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan and Intelligence Committee Chairman Rick Crawford have been working on reforming the program, but neither has held or even scheduled a committee markup session. Speaker Johnson may have trouble even getting the Rules Committee to report out a rule on a bill to reauthorize Section 702. And if he can get it out of the Rules Committee, he may have trouble passing it on the floor. Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, Republican of Florida, for instance, says she will oppose the clean extension and, on top of that, wants to attach the Save America Act to the reauthorization measure. She knows it's a must-pass and thinks the Senate would have to swallow the Save America Act to pass the reauthorization. We'll see how that works out. A week ago, Speaker Johnson said he planned to bring the bill to the floor this week. He's had second thoughts on that and will now hold off until the House is back from its 2-week Easter recess. That would put the bill on the floor with just a week to go before the authority expires. Now to the latest on DHS funding. We're now on day 38 of the Department of Homeland Security being unfunded. The Senate has voted on a procedural measure to bring the funding bill to the floor 7 times. And all 7 times, the Democrats have voted against funding DHS. The White House sent a new DHS funding proposal to Senate Democrats last Tuesday. In 5 points, the White House said it was willing to codify several of the policy changes Senate Democrats have demanded. Among the points, the White House will agree to expand the use of body cameras. The administration will limit the locations of enforcement operations, including prohibiting such operations at schools and hospitals. There will be greater oversight of DHS detention facilities, visible officer identification, and adherence to current law prohibiting the detention or deportation of U.S. citizens. But the White House proposal does not address 2 of the Democrats' main concerns: requiring law enforcement officials to obtain a judicial warrant before entering private property, and prohibiting federal law enforcement officials from wearing masks. It's now been more than a month that DHS has been unfunded, and TSA employees have missed 2 paychecks. Consequently, they're calling in sick in increasing numbers at major airports around the country, and according to news reports, more than 400 of them have quit their jobs. The resulting scarceness of TSA agents is leading to longer and longer lines at security screening points. Wait times for people at places like Hobby Airport in Houston or Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta are now often longer than 3 hours. Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz raised the prospect Saturday of offering a bill to fund all of DHS except for ICE. That's an idea the Democrats have already put into play. They've tried twice now to move a similar bill on the Senate floor because they believe that right now they're the ones taking the brunt of the blame for the long lines at TSA screening points. Twice, the Republicans have objected to unanimous consent requests, making the argument that Democrats could end the long lines anytime they like. All they have to do is vote for the DHS funding bill they've chosen to block. But Republicans have come to the conclusion that Democrats will never ever vote to fund DHS unless all their demands are met. And there's just no way Republicans will allow all the Democrats' demands to become policy. So they're stuck. They're at an impasse, and they need to find a way to break it. The Cruz proposal would be to fund the 21 agencies at DHS other than ICE via a regular funding bill, and then fund ICE in a reconciliation bill that would only need 50 Republican votes to pass. Punchbowl News reported this morning that yesterday, Senate Majority Leader Thune brought this proposal to the president and even said he believed the Senate Democrats would go along with the proposal to end the shutdown. But President Trump said no. Trump wants Republicans to stay in Washington and continue fighting with Democrats over DHS funding and the Save America Act. The president went further, saying he would criticize any Republicans who leave town for the Easter recess next week. Instead, he said he would invite all the GOP senators and their families to come to the White House for Easter dinner. On Sunday evening, President Trump made public his short-term solution to the problem of long lines at TSA screening points: have ICE deployed to airports. In a social media post, the president directed ICE to assist TSA agents at airports across the country beginning today. Border Czar Tom Homan, who was put in charge of the operation by President Trump, said they would show up Monday morning at 14 select airports, including Kennedy and LaGuardia in New York, Newark, Philadelphia, Chicago, Atlanta, New Orleans, and Phoenix. Now to the latest on the Save America Act. The Senate began its debate on the Save America Act on Tuesday after agreeing to, by a vote of 51 to 48, the motion to proceed. The 2 Republicans who failed to vote for the motion to proceed were Alaska's Lisa Murkowski, who voted no on the motion to proceed, and North Carolina's Tom Tillis, who simply did not vote. So the debate began Tuesday, and senators debated Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We anticipate they'll get back to the debate either tonight or tomorrow after they're done voting on 2 nominations, including confirming Markwayne Mullin to serve as Secretary of Homeland Security. Now to the China summit. President Trump was supposed to be jetting off to China to meet Chinese Communist Party head honcho Xi Jinping on April 1. China was looking forward to the meeting as a signal to the rest of the world that China had really arrived as a superpower, a co-equal to the United States. But Xi will have to wait, because President Trump announced on Thursday that he would be delaying his trip to China by 5 or 6 weeks, so he could stay in Washington to direct the war effort against Iran. While he did not suggest specific dates for the delayed summit, President Trump said he expected it would happen in mid-May. Now to the Joe Kent resignation. Joe Kent, a former U.S. Army Special Forces officer and CIA paramilitary officer who served for a little more than a year as director of the National Counterterrorism Center in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, tendered his resignation last week, citing his differences with President Trump over the war against Iran. In his resignation letter, Kent asserted that Iran posed no imminent threat to the United States and cited his belief that Trump was doing Israel's bidding when he authorized strikes against Iran. He followed his resignation with appearances on Tucker Carlson's podcast and Megyn Kelly's podcast. The White House countered that Kent's resignation letter was full of inaccuracies. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said the president views it as deeply unfortunate that the individual who the president gave the privilege of working for the administration put out this resignation on government letterhead with many falsehoods throughout, essentially accusing the president of being manipulated by foreign governments, end quote. Now to Pentagon funding. The Pentagon sent to the White House last week a request for $200 billion in supplemental funding for the Iran war. The White House has not signed off on that request yet and has not transmitted it to the appropriators on Capitol Hill. But the appropriators are aware of it, and they're beginning to think about how to get that kind of money to the Pentagon without any Democrat help, because they assume no more than a few, if any, Democrats would be willing to vote to fund this war they oppose. Funding for the Pentagon could be provided via a reconciliation bill, which would need no Democrat votes because it's not debatable in the Senate for more than 20 hours. That means it's not subject to filibuster. That means it can be passed with only Republican votes. Stay tuned on that front. Now to the latest on the war against Iran. We are now in the 4th week of the U.S. and Israeli war against Iran, and the focus of the war has now become a battle for control of the Strait of Hormuz. We talked about this at some length last week, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but for those of you who may have missed last week's broadcast, the Strait of Hormuz is a narrow sea channel, just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, that connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea, and beyond that to the rest of the world's shipping lanes. About 20% of the world's oil flows through the strait on a regular basis. So when it's closed to commercial traffic, prices for oil-based products, that's just about everything, spike. Despite the shellacking Iran has taken over the last 3 weeks, it has closed the strait, and it has said it will not reopen the strait until the U.S. and Israel cease their attacks on it and begin to pay for rebuilding what they've destroyed. That's not likely to happen anytime soon, so it looks like it will be up to the U.S. to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. In that battle, Iran has what we call an asymmetric advantage. It does not have to blow up every commercial vessel that tries to transit the strait. It only has to strike one, and the rest will stay out of the strait on their own, either because their captains and crews will not be willing to attempt to transit the strait, or because their owners will not want to risk the damage to their billion-dollar-plus tankers, or because even if they were willing to risk it, they couldn't find insurance priced at a level that would make sense economically. This gives the Iranians a tremendous advantage given the correlation of forces currently in the region. Solution? Change the correlation of forces in the region. So, it should surprise no one that the U.S. has begun moving several Marine expeditionary units into the region. These Marines can be used to take and hold territory, like the Iranian coastline of the strait, from which fast boats, drones, and anti-ship missiles could be launched. These Marines could also be used to take and hold Karg Island, the island in the Persian Gulf about 15 miles off the Iranian coast, which serves as the central hub of Iran's economy. About 90% of Iran's oil exports are processed through the facilities on Karg Island. On Saturday evening, President Trump threatened the Iranian regime. If the Iranians do not reopen the strait within 48 hours, he warned, the U.S. will begin striking and obliterating Iran's power plants, beginning, he said, with the largest one. For anyone wondering about international law and the principle that combatants are not allowed to target civilian infrastructure, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Mike Waltz preempted any talk of war crimes, asserting on Fox News yesterday that Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps controls a lot of the nation's infrastructure and is using it to power Iran's war effort. Consequently, any attack or attacks on Iran's power grid is a strike against a legitimate military target. Asian markets did not react well to the news of President Trump's threat to hit the Iranian power grid. The Japanese stock index fell 3.5%, and the South Korean stock index fell 6.5%. Monday morning, President Trump announced he had given orders to postpone for 5 days the attack he had threatened on Saturday evening. He said the U.S. was in talks with Tehran about ending the war. The Iranians denied that any talks were taking place. Stay tuned. And that's our Washington Report for this week. If you've got any questions or comments, please drop us a line at jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. That's jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. If you want me to answer a question during the broadcast, just put "for broadcast" in the subject line. We'll be back next week with another edition of the Washington Report. Same time, same channel. Until then, be well and be active.